Why did America's most decorated pilot die under mysterious circumstances? This is the story you clicked for, and the question that still won't rest. In the last summer of World War II, a young legend climbed into a brand new jet, lifted off over California, and never came home. He wasn't a rookie. He was America's ace of aces. 40 confirmed victories, a Medal of Honor pinned by General MacArthur, the kind of name crowds cheered and enemies feared. On August 6, 1945, the same day the world first heard the word Hiroshima, he fell from the sky, his parachute unopened, his jet a fireball on the streets of North Hollywood. 2 pumps, 1 switch, 12 flights in a machine barely anyone understood. Was it a simple mechanical failure, or something far stranger? In the next hour, we follow the trail he left behind, love letters and squadron logs, whispered memos and missing pages, and we hold them up to the light. The official story asks us to move on, but the details won't let us. Tonight, we open the canopy on the last flight of Major Richard Bongyand. We start with the boy who learned to fly before he learned to fear. The farm boy who outflew war. The story begins where no one expects a legend to start. A 2-story farmhouse near Poplar, Wisconsin. Fields that smell of cut hay. A boy who watches the sky whenever he should be watching his chores. He learns the names of clouds before he learns to dance. And when a plane threads the horizon, he races the shadow until it outruns him. The ground is home, but the sky is calling. Years pass. America changes. The boy grows into a wiry young man with steady hands and a quiet voice. He leaves home for a cockpit, and the cockpit becomes a world. Flight school is discipline, blisters, and joy. He is not the strongest in the room. He might be the calmest. In the air, calm is everything. War arrives like thunder. Training turns into departure orders, and departure turns into the South Pacific. Heat presses against the skin like a second uniform. The jungle hums. The ocean breathes. He meets his new partner on the ramp, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. All twin booms and promise, a knife built from engines and aluminum. It climbs like a thought and dives like a verdict. He learns its moods the way other men learn a lover's voice. He will spend his youth inside this shape, and it will return him again and again, when odds say it shouldn't. One by one, the notches arrive. He does not spray and pray. He closes, measures, and ends it. The scoreboard grows, and with it, a responsibility he never asked for. Some nights he lies awake, hearing the engine even when the revs are silent. Some mornings he counts the names that won't answer roll call. The tally that makes him famous costs him sleep. By late 1944, the number is 40. 40 enemy aircraft fallen in the Pacific haze. The newspapers call him Ace of Aces. The official records confirm what crews already whisper on the line. He is the best America has. In a humble ceremony under tropical sun, a general with a corncob pipe pins a star around his neck, and the man from Poplar, Wisconsin tries to look as if he belongs inside the moment. He smiles for the camera, because that's what heroes do. He shakes hands he barely remembers and signs bits of paper he will never see again. Inside, he is thinking about maintenance checks and the weather. He is thinking about the men who didn't come back. He is thinking about getting home. The Medal of Honor rests on his chest like a weight and a promise. He wears it for those who can't. He wears it because the war demanded a price, and he paid it in the air. The facts are public now. 40 victories, Medal of Honor, America's top-scoring ace. Those parts of the story are carved in granite. Those parts are not in dispute. Fame can be a second battlefield. The states welcome him like a returning champion. He rides in open cars and smiles from stages. Cameras flash. Reporters ask the same questions in different suits. What does it feel like? How do you do it? Are you afraid? He answers politely. Always. He says he is lucky. He says others deserve the credit. He says he was just doing his job. After the interviews, he finds a corner and breathes. He meets a young woman whose name he will write on his plane. A photograph taped inside a cockpit thousands of miles away. A promise carried through flak and tracer. When the crowds thin and the brass finishes congratulating, another request arrives. Quieter, heavier. The war is changing. A new kind of airplane is whispering through blueprints, and the Army Air Forces need hands they trust. On a map, the line from the Pacific to California looks short. In life, it is the longest walk he has taken. He leaves propellers behind for something else entirely. At Burbank, Lockheed's plant breathes like a living thing. Crews move like a tide under the ribs of hangars. Drafting tables glint in the afternoon light, and in one corner, under guard and under pressure, a sleek fuselage sits on its own, oddly clean, like a knife laid out on a white cloth. P-80 shooting star, a jet, the future arriving before anyone has time to decide whether they're ready. He runs a hand along the metal and feels possibility. Then he feels the absence of everything he trusted. No prop torque, no familiar whine, no correction he can make out of habit. He will have to unlearn and relearn at the same time. 12 flights, 4 hours and 15 minutes. That is all the time he will get with the new machine before the day that matters. The number shocks modern ears, but in 1945 the world is accustomed to moving faster than safety can keep up. Acceptance flights must be flown. War demands inventory. The assembly lines don't pause for nerves. He logs each sortie with neat handwriting, felt sense of a jet that accelerates like a secret. It is not temperamental, not exactly. It is new. New things bite in new ways. Engineers brief him on the fuel system, the pumps, the switch that lives between normal and emergency. He nods, he memorizes, he practices reaching for it, with eyes closed. He promises himself he will never need it. He does not say that promise out loud. Others have made the same vow and found their hands coming up empty. In the moment heat turns to silence. The number 4 hours and 15 minutes belongs in ink. You can look it up. It is frightening and true. What the public sees is simpler. The hero found a new challenge. The hero accepted. Posters and press releases do not mention how hard it is to change aircraft at the far edge of technology, how arrogance kills, and how humility can be just as dangerous when it convinces a cautious man to trust procedures that are still being written. He is cautious. He is also loyal. When they ask him to fly acceptance tests for the P-80, he answers the way he always has. Yes, if the war needs this machine, it will need pilots who can tell the truth about it. He intends to be one of them. He studies the manuals. He studies the sky. He studies himself. Then he walks the line, cockpit to cockpit, and breathes the oil and the heat and the future. The first payoff in this story arrives with a cold fact that feels like a warning. The man with 40 victories, the man who could make a P-38 sing, is strapped to a jet he has flown for the time it takes to watch a single feature film. He sits behind a turbojet engine that gulps kerosene and produces a thrust no propeller can match. And between him and the ground is a small list of things that must go right. The pumps must feed. The fire must hold. The switch no one ever wants to touch must be touched if the first pump fails. The engineering is sound. The humans are human. We will come back to that switch. We will come back to those pumps. And we will ask, together, whether those details doomed him, or whether someone else did. If you live for stories like this, where history leaves a door ajar and we step through it, stay with me. Subscribe, share this with a friend who loves aviation, and keep your eyes on the horizon. The next chapter takes us behind the hangar doors. Back in Wisconsin, the family reads the papers and tries to make sense of the boy they raised and the man the country is praising. The letters he sends home don't boast. They describe the feel of rain in the tropics, the taste of tinned food when you're too tired to care, the way a friend's laughter echoes inside a Quonset hut. Fame doesn't change his handwriting, it does change his schedule. Parades, bond tours, speeches that leave him hoarse. He's 24 and already past the point where life can be normal again. He knows it. He leans into duty because duty is the only thing that hasn't lied to him. When he is finally allowed back to the line, not in combat, but at a factory with its own kind of front, he exhales. At last, a problem that can be solved with checklists and skill. He tells himself that at Burbank, the mechanics like him because he listens. Engineers like him because he reads before he asks. The brass likes him because his name quiets questions. If he says a jet is ready, it is ready. If he says it isn't, they can tell the schedule to wait. He walks the ramp in a slant of light that makes the aluminum glow. Somewhere beyond the fence, a city hums, indifferent. Somewhere across the ocean, the war grinds on, waiting for a surrender that refuses to come. He is a bridge between eras, one foot in a piston-driven past, the other in a jet-burning future. Those who work beside him sense the strain in that stance. No one says it aloud. Acceptance flights are simple on paper. Take off, climb, level, at test altitude. Run the checks. Listen to the engine's voice. Watch the needles. Feel the airframe wake up under thrust. If something feels wrong, terminate the profile and return. Do not improvise. Do not chase cue. He was an artist in combat, but in testing he is a metronome. He does it by the book, because the book is the only thing standing between a new pilot and a black ribbon on a uniform. And yet, the book is still being written. Changes arrive daily. Systems get updated on the line, and not every cockpit reflects the latest thinking. We like to imagine the birth of an era in clean chapters. In reality, the pages overlap and smudge. He lives inside the smudge. By the middle of that summer, he knows the jet well enough to respect it. The throttle's promise is also its temptation. The smell of hot metal has a new edge. The taxiways feel shorter. The runway rushes at the canopy with a speed that makes his stomach leap even when he expects it. He learns to keep his breathing steady as the aircraft drinks fuel. Flame is a companion and a threat. When propellers quit, you have glide. When jets quit, you have seconds. So he practices the reach. Left hand forward on the throttle. Right hand finds the switch on instinct. He hears an engineer's voice in his head, explaining why the auxiliary pump is where it is and what it does when the primary fails. Jet age, dark rooms, morning at Lockheed smells of oil, paint, and pressure. The war isn't over, but the race to the future has already started. In a hangar lined with scaffolds and secrets, men in rolled-up sleeves speak in hushed tones around the newest creation, the P-80. Shooting star. It gleams like something stolen from tomorrow. Each rivet, each curve, feels dangerous and untested. Major Richard Bong steps into that light, like a man visiting a shrine. Around him, cameras flash. Executives grin. To the public, this is Progressing America's first operational jet. But inside, he feels something colder. The machine is powerful, yes, but its heart is unpredictable. He knows what perfection sounds like, the rhythm of twin-piston engines purring in harmony. This sound, though this jet whine, it hums like a threat. The engineers brief him again. They talk of new fuel systems, centrifugal compressors, and throttle sensitivity. He nods, taking notes, but inside he's weighing every risk. 4 hours and 15 minutes in the air with this beast. That's all. Not enough time to know what it hides. Not enough time to build trust. Outside, the California sun burns bright over Burbank. The war headlines shout victory in Europe. Crowds line up for rationed coffee and talk about peace. Yet inside these hangars, the next war is already being designed. When Bong climbs into the cockpit for the 12th time, something feels different. The usual calm that steadies him before takeoff is missing. He looks down at the polished controls, gleaming, sterile, new. There's a faint vibration under his boots, a mechanical heartbeat pulsing through the seat. It's alive, but not entirely stable. The test checklist is short. Routine, they call it. He runs his fingers along the emergency fuel switch, the auxiliary pump. One flick could mean life or death. He'd practiced the motion so often his hand now moves there by instinct. He hopes it never does for real. Bong, you're clear for takeoff. The voice crackles through his headset, casual, unaware of what's about to unfold. He throttles forward. The jet surges, almost leaping from the ground. The sensation is brutal, thrilling. 1,000 pounds of thrust roaring through his bones. The sky opens fast. Faster than any P-38 ever could. Climb, level, steady. The gauges dance. The airframe hums with potential. He feels a strange pride rise in his chest. America has done it. They've built something that defies gravity and fear. He's flying the future. Then, a tremor, barely noticeable at first. The RPM needle dips. A flicker on the fuel gauge. He glances at it, frowning. A small drop, maybe turbulence. He steadies the stick. The vibration fades, then returns, harsher this time. His hand hovers near the switch. He hesitates. Procedure says check, confirm, then switch. But the engine coughs once. Just one sound. Silence floods the cockpit. He throws the switch. Nothing. The airspeed bleeds fast. From the tower, someone watches the jet begin a shallow descent, its engine spooling down like a sigh. They think it's part of the test profile. It isn't. At 2,000 feet, the canopy flashes open. The pilot ejects or tries to. Witnesses say they saw a dark shape fall, trailing smoke. Some insist the plane exploded mid-air. Others swear it was intact until impact. The truth fractures in the heat wave of the explosion that follows. Oxnard Street, North Hollywood, a residential block turned inferno. The jet tears through a house, scattering debris and memory across lawns. Fire crews arrive too late. By the time the flames die, the nation's greatest ace lies silent among the wreckage of the future he helped create. News spreads, but the world barely looks. Hiroshima has stolen the front page. 2 fires on the same day, one man-made to end a war, another born from ambition and error, one remembered forever, one almost forgotten. The official report arrives days later. Fuel pump failure, a tragic mechanical malfunction, case closed. But inside Lockheed's offices, whispers start to grow. Engineers murmur about design flaws they weren't ready to admit. Others say Bong's jet was a prototype different from the one cleared for full production. One man swears the auxiliary switch was reversed in this particular cockpit, wired backward by mistake. Another claims he saw a classified memo vanish after the crash, signed by someone high enough to bury questions permanently. A colleague, a test pilot named Tony, finds Bong's helmet days later, scorched and cracked. He says it looked like it had been removed before impact, not after. No one listens. The funeral is quiet. The papers call it an accident, a heroic test gone wrong. His fiancée Marge clutches the folded flag and says nothing. She will later confess she never believed the story they told her. He was too careful, she whispers, too calm to die like that. In the months that follow, the Army Air Forces shut down inquiries. The P-80 goes into limited service. America's jet age begins with a ghost at its foundation. Years later, a mechanic, one who worked the line that week, confesses something over a drink. That pump, we'd been having trouble with it, he says. Pressure surges, cavitation. We swapped a few parts between planes to meet deadlines. He doesn't remember which one Bong flew. Or maybe he does, and just doesn't want to. But there's another version, one that no report dares mention. Some veterans whisper that Bong wasn't meant to fly that morning at all, that his name was a late addition, that someone higher up needed a hero's endorsement to prove the jet was safe before Washington's inspection team arrived. And what better proof than the ace of aces taking the controls? The truth sits buried in the wreckage, mixed with molten metal and silence. Yet one thing remains certain: his parachute was found unopened, unburned, packed perfectly, ready to save him, if only he'd pulled it. Did he try, or was there no time? Some say the explosion was instant. Others believe the canopy jammed, trapping him in. A few even wonder if he stayed with the plane on purpose to keep it from crashing into the neighborhood below. No one can prove any of it. But late at night, when test pilots gather in hangars or bars, they tell his story quietly. They say every jet born afterward carries a bit of his luck and his fear inside its frame. They say sometimes, in the hum of a P-80 engine, you can almost hear the echo of a man who knew exactly what the sky could give and take. And somewhere, locked inside a dusty cabinet in an Air Force archive, lies a sealed report stamped confidential. The name on the folder, Bong, Richard I. 12 minutes to impact. The sky that morning was a clean, impossible blue. A sky meant for triumphs, not tragedies. Mechanics joked on the ramp, cigarettes between their fingers, unaware that they were minutes away from becoming witnesses to something history would bury beneath headlines of a different explosion half a world away. Major Richard Bong arrived early. His shirt was pressed, his eyes steady. There was no premonition in his step, no hesitation in the way he strapped his parachute harness. He'd flown 12 flights in the jet, and though the machine still felt alien, he treated it like every other challenge the war had thrown at him with methodical calm. He walked around the aircraft, hand gliding over the smooth metal, checking the same spots twice. The maintenance crew watched him. He didn't leave inspections to others. He trusted his own eyes. One mechanic, an older man with grease on his sleeves, remembers Bong kneeling near the wing root, staring at a fuel line longer than usual. "You sure this bird's ready?" Bong asked. The man nodded, but later admitted he wasn't sure if he'd been convincing enough. Engines roared across the airfield, drowning thought. The P-80 sat alone at the edge of the runway, a new predator among relics. Bong climbed in, sealed the canopy, and gave a small salute to the crew chief, a practiced gesture. Then the turbine's whine began to rise, sound like metal screaming itself awake. At 10:25 a.m., the aircraft rolled forward. It accelerated faster than anyone expected, wheels leaving the ground in less than a minute. The jet sliced upward into sunlight. For a moment, everyone on the ground felt that shared, naive thrill, the sense that they were witnessing the future being born. From the control tower, the flight looked ordinary. Routine climb, steady altitude. Bong's radio call came through, crisp and confident. "Climb complete, all systems green." Then static. The next voice was panicked. We've lost pressure in the main fuel pump. Switching to auxiliary, seconds later, silence again. Eyewitnesses said the jet made a shallow bank to the right, then leveled off. Others swore it rolled, then straightened. One man said he saw a thin trail of smoke. Another insisted the jet was perfectly fine until it suddenly nosed down. All agree on one thing: it was descending fast. Down below, housewives hung laundry on lines. Children played near fences. No sirens yet, just an unnatural hum that grew louder until the neighborhood air trembled. The P-80 hit the ground with a sound like thunder trapped in a bottle. The shockwave shattered windows for blocks. Fire rose instantly, consuming a house and half a street. When the smoke thinned, there was almost nothing left of the jet, and only a few remains of its pilot, burned, broken, and unrecognizable except for his identification tags. The official report would later state, loss of power during acceptance flight due to fuel pump failure. It read clean, technical, comfortably simple, but the men who worked on the flight line knew better. Machines rarely failed so neatly. Days after the crash, an internal memo circulated quietly through Lockheed. It mentioned irregularities in the auxiliary fuel system, pressure spikes, faulty seals, inconsistent flow rates. It wasn't an admission, only a warning. Still, the timing was eerie. Then the first rumor arrived. Someone claimed the plane Bong flew that morning wasn't the one assigned to him, that a last-minute swap had occurred, ordered by a supervisor eager to impress a visiting inspector. The replacement jet was newer but not fully tested. No record of the switch existed on paper. Weeks later, a mechanic named Jensen disappeared from the project, entirely transferred to an unknown assignment in Nevada. Before leaving, he told a colleague something cryptic. It wasn't the pump that failed, it was what they put in it. The colleague laughed it off. But years later, that line would resurface in classified notes tied to experimental fuel additives, tested during the same period. The strange part was how quickly the government moved to close the case. The investigation lasted less than 10 days. Testimony from eyewitnesses was trimmed. Technical reports were rewritten. By the time the final summary reached Washington, every uncertainty had been replaced with certainty. Accident, end of story. Marge, his fiancée, didn't buy it. She had a letter written by Bong the night before he died. "Something feels off about this engine," he wrote. "The way it cuts when I throttle back. I'll ask them to check the feed lines again tomorrow." That letter was never mentioned in the official report. It vanished into private archives after the funeral. For the first time, doubt began to spread beyond the hangars. Some suspected the problem wasn't mechanical at all, that perhaps Bong's death had been useful. The jet program was expensive, unproven, and facing scrutiny from Congress. Having the nation's top ace fly and die in one of these machines could rally sympathy and funding. A cynical theory, maybe, but not impossible. Decades later, a journalist would track down the original crash photos, images locked away for nearly half a century. In one, the wreckage shows no sign of a typical fuel pump fire. Instead, there's evidence of an onboard detonation pattern, consistent with an electrical short or a sudden ignition inside the cockpit. The photo was labeled, "Do not distribute." What truly happened in those final 12 minutes may never be known. Did Bong fight to restart his engine? Or was there no warning at all? Did he pull the canopy release too late? Or did something jam it shut? Witnesses said they saw him try to bail out, but the canopy might have blown seconds before the aircraft struck the ground. The fact that his parachute remained untouched suggests one final, haunting possibility: that he stayed with the jet to steer it away from the homes below, and maybe that's why his name still echoes among pilots, the man who saved lives even in death. But a deeper mystery lingers in the shadows of Lockheed's archives. Documents marked with his test flight number AF56 are missing from every file set. Not redacted, gone. The sequence skips from 55 to 57. Someone erased him from the chain. When asked years later, a retired engineer gave a tired smile. "We called it an accident because that's what people needed it to be," he said. Truth is, the jet worked fine the next day. His words hang like a ghost in the air. So what really failed on August 6, 1945? The machine or the truth? The answer lies inside a locked cabinet, deep in an Air Force archive that no one has opened in decades. And as we open that door in the next chapter, you'll see why Major Bong's final flight wasn't just a tragedy. It might have been a warning. Paper trails and quiet funerals. The telegram reached Wisconsin before sunset. a line of military jargon wrapped around one brutal truth. Major Richard I. Bong has been killed in an aircraft accident. His mother's hands trembled as she read the words. His father sat still, staring at the wall, lips pressed together. Outside, the wind moved through the cornfields like an echo of the sky that had taken their son. Across the country, headlines competed for attention. One carried the words, "Atomic bomb dropped on Japan." Another, smaller and almost hidden beneath it, read, "Major Richard Bong dies in jet crash." Two stories, same day. One consumed the world. The other slipped through the cracks of history. The funeral came quickly. Flags, uniforms, a speech about courage and sacrifice. But behind the precision of military ceremony, there was unease. Friends whispered that his body had been cremated before independent examiners could review it. The wreckage was cleared within hours, burned fragments swept from the street and taken to a base hangar where they vanished. The official line, "Sensitive material, national security." The family never saw the remains of his jet. At Lockheed, the engineers who had worked beside him were told to move on. But one man couldn't. His name was Walter Page, a systems technician assigned to the P-80 fuel division. The night before the crash, he'd seen a late dispatch come through, a request to swap a fuel control valve from one aircraft to another due to inventory matching. The order bore no signature, and the replacement jet matched the serial number Bong flew. Walter wrote a memo questioning it. The memo disappeared the next day. He received a quiet warning from a supervisor. "Forget it, Page. These things are bigger than you." He didn't forget. He made copies, small handwritten notes he hid in his toolbox. Years later, those notes would resurface, yellowed but legible, describing suspected administrative tampering in the jet's fuel circuit. Meanwhile, Marge, Bong's fiancée, moved through grief like someone walking underwater. Her days filled with letters from strangers, pilots, reporters, admirers, all offering condolences. None offered answers. One envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a photograph, a close-up of Bong beside his jet on the morning of the crash. Someone had circled the tail number in red ink. Beneath it, 3 words, "That plane changed." She brought it to the Army Air Force's office in Los Angeles. They dismissed it as a hoax. But that night, she sat by her window, reading Bong's last letter again, tracing the line where he'd written, "I'll ask them to check the feed lines again tomorrow." It wasn't just mechanical failure anymore. It was beginning to look like substitution. Months passed. The investigation wrapped up with a final statement signed by Brigadier General O.P. Eccles. No negligence, no mechanical anomaly beyond the reported pump malfunction. Case closed. But another file existed, one that never reached public eyes. It contained reports from 2 technicians who examined fragments of the wreckage. They described a melted section of metal, consistent not with impact, but internal ignition. They used a single phrase that still raises eyebrows among aviation historians. "Thermal event prior to contact." Years later, a retired intelligence officer admitted that during the closing months of the war, several prototype fuel mixtures had been tested in secret, meant to extend range and reduce smoke trails for high-speed jets. These blends were volatile, so volatile they were pulled after multiple accidents overseas. But the same officer hinted that one batch remained in circulation for stateside testing. Its designation, JP-1X, a fuel never meant for public acknowledgement. Could Bong's jet have been fueled with that mixture by mistake or design? In Washington, whispers traveled through corridors like static. Someone had lost control of a symbol. The ace of aces, dead not in combat but in a routine test. It made good men nervous. If the truth got out that America's most celebrated pilot might have died because of political haste or hidden experiments, it could wound morale at the moment victory demanded unity. So silence became policy. When Marge tried again, writing to officials for clarification, she received a letter from the Air Materiel Command. Polite, polished, final. All due diligence has been observed. The incident is considered resolved. Please accept the gratitude of a nation for Major Bong's service. She folded the letter once, placed it in a box with his photographs, and never wrote again. But the story refused to die. 10 years later, a young aviation journalist named Frank Donovan reopened the file while researching a book on test pilots. He found contradictions in every report, fuel readings that didn't match, maintenance logs rewritten in 2 different inks, and a glaring omission of the auxiliary switch position in the final analysis. That detail, whether the switch had been flipped or not, was the key. If Bong never engaged it, the engine should have restarted automatically under pressure. If he did engage it, and the engine still failed, something far deeper was wrong. Donovan requested access to the maintenance ledger for the jet's serial number. 2 days later, his request was denied. The ledger was missing. But one night a man knocked on his door, a stranger in his 60s, soft-spoken, smelling faintly of jet fuel and age. He handed Donovan a folder. "You didn't get this from me," he said. Inside were photographs from the wreckage site, copies of internal notes, and a typed statement unsigned but dated the week of Bong's death. It read, "Flight reassigned under Directive 88A. Fuel additive trial authorized. No public disclosure permitted." Donovan stared at it for hours. The name on the directive matched a Lockheed division involved in post-war propulsion research, the same division that would later evolve into the foundation of classified projects at Groom Lake. Was Bong's flight part of an early military experiment cloaked as a test? Or was his death a convenient shield for a malfunction they couldn't afford to admit existed? History never offered a clear answer. What's undeniable is that, after Bong's crash, the Air Force imposed sweeping changes on jet testing protocols, suddenly mandating dual verification for all pre-flight fuel loads and introducing stricter isolation for prototype fuel additives. The rules appeared overnight, without explanation. Walter Page, the technician who once questioned that mysterious valve swap, vanished from the aerospace industry records by 1947. Some said he retired to Oregon. Others claimed he was hired into a government program so secret it erased his past. Decades later, when a historian asked a former Lockheed engineer about the Bong case, the old man only smiled and said, "Every legend begins with a test flight, and every test flight ends with a secret. In the end, the paper trail runs out, the memos fade, the voices fall silent. But the questions remain louder than ever. Why was America's greatest pilot given so little training time in an unproven jet? Why did the Army bury the wreckage before engineers could examine it? And why did the world's most advanced fighter on that day one, capable of outclimbing anything in the skyfall without a single radio distress call after a system failure that should have been survivable? Somewhere, in a warehouse labeled archival, disposal pending, a rusted metal tag still carries the number of Bong's aircraft. It sits in the dark, unremarkable to anyone who doesn't know what it meant to fly that machine, and perhaps that's where the real story hides, not in the glory of his victories, but in the silence surrounding his death. The truth didn't vanish, it was locked away. Echoes in metal, shadows in memory, in the quiet hours before dawn. The Lockheed plant still hums faintly, like an old heart that refuses to stop. Decades have passed since the crash, but the building feels haunted not by ghosts, but by the weight of things unsaid. Somewhere beneath layers of paint and progress, the story of Major Richard Bong still lingers in the steel, waiting for someone to listen. A young archivist named Helen Carver begins to dig. It's 1973, the era of declassification and restless curiosity. Her job is simple: sort through old test records before they're transferred to microfilm. She doesn't expect to find history staring back in a box labeled obsolete to be destroyed. She discovers a torn folder. The cover reads, Bong R.I., Flight 12. Her breath catches. Inside are fragments, typed memos, smudged photographs, and one page marked confidential technical note, do not copy. The paper is fragile, but the ink is clear. It describes a fuel line, pressure instability observed during JP-1X evaluation. The 6th of August 45, the same day Bong died. The note ends abruptly. Recommend suspension of pilot testing pending further safety review. It's unsigned. Helen hesitates. She knows she should report it, but curiosity outweighs caution. She spends her nights piecing together what remains. In one photo, the tail section of a P-80 lies half buried in soot, scrawled on the back in pencil, Oxnard and Satsuma, engine intact. The official report claimed it was destroyed on impact. Someone had lied. That discovery spreads quietly among a few veterans still working in aerospace. They talk in careful tones over coffee, each remembering fragments, engineers who vanished, reports that shifted overnight. One of them, an old test pilot named Riordan, finally agrees to meet her. He's in his 80s now, voice trembling like thin metal in wind. I saw the wreckage, he says. They brought it to Plant B that same night. I wasn't supposed to be there, but I recognized the tail code. It was his. The engine. It wasn't burned. It was shut down. Helen leans closer. You mean it didn't fail? Reardon shakes his head. No sign of explosion. No sign of fuel starvation either. It looked like the engine was cut deliberately. Power off. Just dead. The words hang in the air, heavy as guilt. If the engine was shut down before impact, then Bong might have been trying to control the descent, to steer the doomed jet away from homes below. The neighborhood he spared never knew that. They only saw smoke. Helen starts digging deeper. She traces the mysterious directive mentioned in Walter Page's missing notes 88A. It appears again, buried inside a funding ledger from 1945 under a vague title, Performance Verification, Special Propulsion Additives. The project leader's name, Colonel James Hollis, the same officer who oversaw Bong's test assignment. She finds one more reference to Hollis, a short letter addressed to the Air Technical Service Command, dated 2 days after the crash. It reads, recommend immediate containment of public inquiry. Pilot selection ensured public trust in program integrity. The implication chills her. Was Bong chosen not just because he was skilled, but because he was famous enough to make the program look safe? And when it failed, his name was powerful enough to distract from the cause. Helen takes her findings to a retired journalist, Frank Donovan, who had once chased the same leads 20 years earlier. His hair is grey now, his voice slower, but when he hears Bong's name, his eyes sharpen. I told them back then, he says quietly. It wasn't an accident. It was theater. Together, they uncover a final clue: a flight schedule for August 6, 1945, marked with revisions. Bong's name wasn't on the morning roster. Another pilot's was. Then, in red pencil, someone scratched it out and wrote, Maja Bong Minus Mu Hours. No initials, no approval signature. Donovan exhales. That's how it happens. Last-minute substitution, no paperwork trail. By the time the ink dries, the truth's gone. They decide to publish, but just as the story nears completion, Helen's supervisor intercepts the copied files. He warns her that some documents fall under Cold War security parameters. She argues, but within a week she's reassigned to another department. Donovan receives an anonymous letter, no return address, only a single line typed in black ribbon. Let the hero rest. For a while, both obey, but history has a way of refusing burial. In 1982, construction workers demolishing an old Lockheed test facility near Burbank uncover a sealed storage vault. Inside are corroded filing cabinets, long forgotten. Among the water-damaged folders, one bears a faded tag, P80 acceptance loss, R.I. Bong. The metal drawer is warped shut. When archivists pry it open, they find photographs, diagrams, and one intact envelope labeled Restricted Personnel Inquiry. Inside lies a brief memo. Pilot expressed concern over auxiliary pump switch design, requested modification to prevent reversal under stress. Change deferred due to production schedule. That note changes everything. The switch, the very one he may have reached for in his final moments, was known to be faulty. Engineers had debated its orientation for months. A simple reversal could cause fuel starvation instead of recovery. In other words, flipping it in emergency conditions could kill the engine entirely. The memo was dated 3 weeks before Bong's death. The file disappears again soon after discovery. No agency claims responsibility, but copies circulate quietly through aviation circles, each generation passing the story down like contraband truth. To this day, veterans still speak of him with reverence. Some believe he sacrificed himself knowingly, staying with the jet to save others. Others believe he was betrayed by the very system he trusted, the same machine that needed his fame more than his safety. At dawn on the anniversary of his crash, pilots sometimes fly over Poplar, Wisconsin, dipping their wings once toward the ground. They say it's tradition, they say it's respect. But among those who know the old rumors, it's also something else, a reminder that even heroes can vanish behind classified ink. Standing at his gravesite years later, Helen places a folded note between the flowers. "You didn't fail," it reads. "They did." The wind carries the words away, and somewhere in the archives, a new label appears on a shelf, marked pending review. Beneath it sits a file with no barcode, no date, and one haunting title: Case Reassessment, Bong Incident Reopen Request 2025.